With House spending bills finished, the spotlight turns to what Congress tackles next. From healthcare funding and ACA subsidies to renewed crypto legislation, and even early plans for a sweeping 2026 reconciliation package aimed at lowering costs. Here to help us sort through those priorities and what they mean for the months ahead is WTOP's Capitol Hill correspondent, Mitchell Miller.
Mitchell, it's great to see you face to face. We're recording from your office on the Capitol today.
That's right. We are squeezed into my little booth here on the House side. We're 3 stories up, but we look down on the National Mall if you just walk down the hall. So it's great to have you here.
Thanks for the invitation. It's kind of quiet up on the Hill today, but there's a lot to talk about that happened last week. Let's start with the House completing all their spending bills. I guess the biggest surprise was that they got the DHS bill through. What did it take to get agreement on that?
You know, it was really interesting, I think, because they were so close to the finish line that they decided, even though there are a lot of reservations on the Democratic side, there were these 7 Democrats that said, we are going to vote for this regardless. And that was really the key. And there was also a lot of discussion, as you know, about Republicans, about whether they would have enough people because we've had absences. The margin is always super tight. But I think they were confident enough that that was actually the first bill of a series of bills that they took up. So it seems like House Speaker Mike Johnson finally knew that he was going to have the votes on that, which is not always the case. And then they were able to move on to the omnibus with the package of defense and transportation, education, et cetera. So that final omnibus so that they could get out of town, basically, before the weather hit.
And do you think those agreements that they finally got through on the House side will carry over into the Senate?
I think for the most part they will. There are a few items in the overall omnibus that could give pause to some members of the Senate, both Republicans and Democrats. On the Democratic side, we're still going to have the issue with DHS and whether or not they're going to go ahead with ICE. A lot of Democrats have said they will just not support it no matter what. The other interesting issue, which was kind of a surprise last week, was the House effectively jammed the Senate by approving this provision that says basically they cannot allow for the suing of the government in connection with these calls that were monitored during the January 6th investigation. Senators were really upset about it, particularly, obviously, Republican senators. And so they had included that provision earlier. The Republicans in the House actually went along with Democrats and reversed it. So they would have to take that out of the omnibus if they are going to pass it. So I think it's going to stay in there, and there will be some grumbling among Republican senators, but I think that's going to stay in the legislation.
Well, the president said last week he's anticipating a shutdown again. Does that seem practical?
That was also kind of a surprise to a lot of people because there has been a little bit of a chest beating here in the House, particularly about the fact that they actually got all these 12 appropriations bills done. Now, granted, they were supposed to be done by October 1st, so let's not praise ourselves too much. But nonetheless, the fact that that happened, there was a lot of confidence moving forward. And so when the president said that he thought that there might be a shutdown, I think a lot of people read that as basically another effort to ding the Democrats, to say, if anything bad happens, it's going to be the Democrats' fault. So he's kind of setting the stage just in case that happens. But I don't think, barring some really surprising developments, that we are looking at a partial government shutdown.
Well, that's good to hear. Just sort of one other question while we're on this topic. The Senate was out on recess last week. This giant storm has really snarled travel. Do they have enough days left to get through the remaining bills, get them approved, get them to the president to get signed in time?
Well, as much as the senators have a lot of pull, they can't really do anything about the weather, right? So they are dealing with all of these issues that every American across the country is dealing with. I think what will happen, though, is the Senate, as you know, can essentially create its own rules. So if they go by the book and they go through everything like they would normally do, they would not have the time to do this. But I think they are going to get these agreements during this week where they can speed things up and eventually get this done. Even if it weren't to be done by January 30th, I think it's going to be done within a day or two.
That's good to hear. I'm speaking with Mitchell Miller. He's Capitol Hill correspondent for WTOP. Mitchell, beyond appropriations, there were other things that happened last week. Let's talk about health insurance executives who testified on the Hill. What does that mean for future agreements around healthcare policy and the ACA subsidies?
Well, that was a really interesting hearing last week because you had Republicans and Democrats kind of in reverse roles. In this case, Republicans were going after health executives and saying, why are you increasing these rates? Why is everything going so expensively? And then on the Democratic side, they were actually defending a lot of the CEOs and these people that are high up in the health industry, saying that they are doing the best that they can. They want to move this forward. And I think part of that is because Democrats are still trying to keep things somewhat status quo and get this extension of these ACA subsidies. However, I really don't think that these ACA subsidies, at least the 3-year plan that the Democrats want, is going to move forward. It seems like after we had a lot of really positive developments over the last few weeks, it got kind of bogged down again. So we're, again, debating issues about health savings accounts, whether or not the middlemen can be taken out with pharmaceuticals, that type of thing. So I think that's going to take longer than people anticipated.
There was another, maybe some progress last week on crypto. That got sidelined for a while and came back. Tell us about what's going on there.
Yeah, there's a couple of things related to crypto in the Agriculture Department, which actually has some of the regulatory oversight related to it. They did advance things, and they are moving forward and feel pretty good about it. However, on the flip side, in the Banking Committee, which has done a lot of work related to regulatory issues, especially how much sway should the SEC, for example, have in regulating crypto, things have bogged down a little bit over there. So it looks like that this week, the Agriculture Committee is actually going to advance some of the legislation that they've been working on. However, in the Senate Banking Committee, which is more of a broader regulatory look at things, that one's going to take longer, and we're hearing that may not really get taken up until February or March.
Are the folks behind these bills integrating the provisions to make sure that they make sense when they finally pass together?
I think they are. Right now, I think we're kind of in that, sausage making stage where they have to kind of reconcile everything once they get out. But as you know, there's been a big push to get crypto legislation, and we keep hearing every few months that they're right on the precipice, and then something comes up. There was a big crypto company actually recently that had some reservations about it. So I think a lot of the lobbyists in connection with crypto are trying to, work things into the legislation some more over the next few weeks.
Well, there's new talk starting really just last week about another giant reconciliation bill. You can only have one a year, so they're starting to talk about one for 2026. What might we see if that effort moves forward?
Well, as you know, Republicans are really concerned about affordability issues. Despite what the president says sometimes about it being a hoax, he's been out there trying to speak about it. And Republicans on Capitol Hill are really nervous about that right now. So they want to include things that will lower the costs of living for people. Address housing is one that you hear a lot about. They really want to do something with that. But there is a little bit of a division within the GOP. Some people just think that there's just not enough energy to get things passed again after the big, beautiful bill from this past year. On the other hand, a lot of Republicans are worried that what will happen to them is what happened earlier with the Democrats when the Democrats passed their large piece of legislation. And that is this whole idea that, if we just get out there and we sell the bill and tell people what's in it and let them know that we extended these tax cuts, all of these things, that they'll magically start thinking, I'm going to vote Republican again, or I'm going to vote against Democrats. And I think there is some skepticism about whether that will work politically. And that's why you hear about this big push for another reconciliation bill. And in fact, OMB head Russ Vought was actually speaking with Republicans recently about that, saying they really need to try to do something. So it's really going to be interesting to see what happens over the next few months, of whether they can get some momentum for that.
So 2 questions to follow on. One, are there enough specific proposals that would actually address affordability to make a bill? And second, timing, that would come out just before the midterm. So how does it all fit together?
Right. I think there is a bit of skepticism about whether or not there is enough specifically to get into a big bill. If you're going to try to sell another huge piece of legislation, but you only have a handful of things that are in it, maybe there are some ones specific to housing that a lot of people could get behind. But beyond some of these other issues, it looks like it's a little bit vague. And then to your point about the timing, Congress in this coming year is going to be out a lot because it's a midterm election year. People are going to be on the road. We've already had one of the members of the House who has not voted more than 24 times because he's campaigning in Texas. So that type of dynamic is going to make it very, very hard, I think, even with the Republicans still in power, to try to get some kind of reconciliation legislation passed.
I've been speaking with Mitchell Miller. He's Capitol Hill correspondent for WTOP. Mitchell, thanks again for inviting me up to your cubicle today.
All right. And thank you for coming up to the Capitol. Appreciate it.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.